Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, I went back to the mid-70s to take a look at Ramones, and they were performing Blitzkrieg Bop. Unfortunately, it got blocked worldwide on copyrights, so you guys know the drill. The link to the video that I watched and analysed is going to be in the description below and also pinned to the top of the comments section. Go there, click on the link, watch the video, and then come back here for the analysis, and I'll see you guys in the comments section. And there we have it. A short performance, of course, a trademark of the Ramones as a band, and with their writing, keeping everything really at 2 minutes or just over 2 minutes in length, but it is all out. As I'm sure you guys already know, being referred to as the Ramones and all having a surname of Ramone, they weren't related, it's just something that they did with the band, and other future members would do that as well, just give themselves that surname as a stage name. But getting into the analysis of the performance, the song, and the band as a whole as well, because they were right at the forefront of that punk rock movement. I said the mid-70s at the beginning of this video. This was released in February 1976. So right in the middle of the decade, pretty much. And that whole movement that did happen in the 70s and also came over to the UK, it was something that took the music in a totally different direction. Like I've mentioned in other videos where I've looked at punk bands and punk rock bands, it was the attitude more than anything that people latched onto. There was also a lot musically going on that will fly under the radar, but we will look at it in a bit of detail in this video. It was a style of music at the time when it came along that the teenagers would get into, the younger generation, almost as a protest against the older generation because they were so out of touch, and also possibly kids and teenagers at the time thought that their voices weren't being heard in society, and punk rock was the perfect antidote to that because it was a style of music that was impossible to avoid with the delivery, with the musical delivery of it as well. When we look at the vocal stylization and the vocal range, and also just the type of vocal being used, such as chest voice and belting, borderline shouting, so that when somebody shouts at you, you pay attention. And this is exactly what punk rock did. It had that shouting quality to it. There is melody in there as well. But the hey ho, let's go in this song in particular is something that you can just throw your vocal into. It doesn't matter if you're hitting notes exactly. It's the attitude and the delivery of the vocal that's most important. So when we analyze this from the perspective of being aggressive with a vocal delivery, but then apply that to musically how it's going to work, it needs to be in a comfortable range so that most of your audience can sing along. And certainly at live performances, the guys will be wanting to shout along with any chorus or any part of the vocal melody that has the interaction in there. And this is a great example, but all of the punk rock songs have that element in there. Having the vocal hitting an E4 as the top note immediately makes it accessible for most of the male population, because when a guy shouts, generally he will be able to hit an E4. Even if he's not aiming for those notes, it'll be in and around there. As soon as we start to increase the range, a G4 might be a little bit of a strain for most guys. An A4 certainly is getting up there now into that male tenor range, and the B4, the C5, that is what was considered the holy grail in classical music, to hit a C5 in chest voice because it was seen as such a high note. So what you'll find is that in the 80s, for example, to take another genre, hard rock and metal, a lot of those guys were singing A4s and B4s and sometimes C5s. So it was really high for guys to sing along with, and a lot of guys didn't get into that. It wasn't accessible for them vocally, and they might not know that the reason they can't hit those notes is because They don't have the range for it, or they would have to spend a very long time training their voices to reach those notes consistently. Whereas straight off the bat, with punk rock, you had a range that you could belt and you could shout and you could put aggression into that delivery, and it wasn't outside your range. So the compositions have been configured in such a way that it makes it possible for everybody in the audience to deliver the vocal with as much aggression as they want, because they won't be straining to try and hit a note. The note is already there. When they naturally shout, they're probably getting close to that note. So it's such a great style of music and genre of music for crowd interaction. And that's exactly what you want when you are part of the younger generation and your voice isn't being heard in society. You want to shout, and this is the music that gave everybody that ability. The other thing about the music, the compositions, and we are going to analyze this in a second because I do have the acoustic guitar next to me, not the most punk instrument in the world, but just so you guys can hear it across the microphone. We've got the classic 1-4-5 chord progression, which is in blues. That is old-time blues, and this is the entertaining thing to think about. The younger generation would say to their parents, "I'm not into your music, I'm getting into this punk music." And the parents would probably say, "That music's rubbish. You should be into what we're into," which might have been the old-time blues players and just blues music in general. Not really understanding, unless they were that way inclined musically, to figure out it's exactly the same thing. But with punk, it's delivered in a different range vocally to get aggression and with overdrive on the guitars. But it's still a 1-4-5 progression. The other thing to think about is that if the younger generation's parents were listening to old-time blues records from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, it means that the younger generation growing up as kids have been hearing this 1-4-5 progression all the time. So then when they get to their early teens, late teens, and punk rock comes along, it hits a chord with them subconsciously because they've heard this progression. It is familiar, but they don't know why it's familiar. And then add in the attitude and the overdrive, the distortion on the guitars, and making a point and getting your voices heard. And it's that perfect mix. So I've got the guitar out, as you can tell. The important thing about this genre of music as well is not to underestimate the amount of work going on with the playing across the board, because a lot of people just assume that punk and punk rock was an excuse just to not practice and get up on stage and make a noise and that's it. But the Ramones are a great example of a band who approached the sound in a very specific way, from a very particular angle, to get the fullest sound they could from one guitar. And generally what will happen, if people are looking to take shortcuts with chords, they'll play power chords or fifths. They might throw an extra fifth note in there. By the way, a power chord is just two strings that you're holding down at once, your root note and the fifth. If you want to put in an octave with the fifth, you can do, but you're not going to get a very full sound. Whereas with this performance, we can see we've got full bar chord shapes going on, which means you get all of the top end of the chord that you would miss out if you were looking to take shortcuts. So immediately, musically, it has such a profound effect to fill in more frequency and make it more a wall of sound. So just to quickly explain the 1-4-5 chord progression we've got in this composition. Again, I've done this in many videos. Go back to your do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do scale, like that, and count along with those notes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you just go from 1 to 4 to 5. And that is your chord progression of 1-4-5, which sounds like this. And that is the chord progression we've got here, and the chord progression of the blues. It just follows that pattern. So having that basis in there, it means that it's going to be relatable for everybody, because Everyone's already heard this chord progression. So now to play through the progression as it is in this composition is exactly the same as what I just demonstrated. And obviously this isn't an electric guitar with overdrive and distortion, so it will sound different, but you'll still be able to appreciate the fullness of the sound due to the chords and the version of the chords that are being played. Rather than taking a shortcut, they are playing the full shapes to maximize the sound. So I'm gonna keep all downstrokes with the playing here just for authenticity's sake. So we're going. So you can hear all of that top end that we're getting in there, instead of if I was playing just power chords and trying to take a shortcut and not learn bar chords, because they can take a long time to get down and to get clean, it would sound like this. So it doesn't really do anything. It's fine if you've got another guitarist who can fill in some of the frequency with other chord voicings and just playing a full bar chord in the background if he wants to. But this is the thing, we don't have the luxury of lots of instruments on stage here. It's effectively a three-piece setup when we're looking at the instrumentation. As I'm sure you were aware when I just played through the progression, it sounded aggressive because of all the downstrokes on the root notes of the chords, just making it really strong sounding, because if we do upstrokes, we're now playing some of the top strings as our focal point, which is going to have a weaker element to it. So if I play through the progression with upstrokes, it sounds fine, but it's now sounding a bit more like you're sitting around a campfire and everyone's having a sing-along, whereas doing all the downstrokes, instantly the aggression on that low E string, on those thicker strings at the bottom, make all the difference to the style of music and the way that it is being delivered. So when you add all of these elements together, it's why punk and punk rock sounded so aggressive to what had come before, because people were using upstrokes and people were also singing in head voice and they'd flip up into falsetto. So for the higher notes in their range, you'd get a lighter sound, whereas punk just beasted the chest voice in a range that was accessible. The other thing to remember is that there is definite melody and musicality within the compositions, because if there weren't, you wouldn't be able to sing anything or hum anything. When you're walking down the street minding your own business, there'd be nothing to get stuck in your head if there wasn't a melody to it. And this is another thing that's overlooked about punk music, the amount of melody that is in there. The singers, more often than not, are hitting notes, and that's why they're called singers. They are hitting a very particular melody. This is the thing about punk music. You cannot get up on stage and perform a song like this half-heartedly. You have to throw everything you have into the performance, because it is such a physical exertion doing all of those downstrokes. And by the way, Dee Dee on bass is doing exactly the same thing with the bass line playing the root notes of the chord. So it's really straightforward, straight down the line with the bass lines that are being played, but it's the aggression within the playing that comes across, which just sits in with the overall sound. In order to put on a great show and to get the crowd involved in your live performance, you've got to be tight as a band, and Ramones certainly were that. They also worked so hard, and this is something that a lot of people will overlook, the musical aspects of it that I've analysed tonight. There is so much in there, and it has been approached intentionally from that angle to maximise the aggressive nature of the sound and of the compositions. But I haven't had a chance to get into the background behind Ramones tonight, but hopefully I will be able to do that in the future. It's something that no matter what music you're into, if there's a band who believe in something and they're writing their own music and are working really hard, you've just got to respect it and take your hat off to it, because these guys performed 2,263 shows and pretty much played non-stop for 22 years. So they had a crazy work ethic for getting out there and performing live. Just to give a shout out to the band, because we had Joey on lead vocals, Dee Dee on bass, Tommy on drums, and Johnny on rhythm guitar. The other thing about the band, which I'm sure you already know, the reason for the band name was because Paul McCartney used to sign into hotels under the name Paul Ramon, and the band knew this, so they went for the Ramones as a band name. But thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!